Lost and weary traveler, searching for the way to go. Stranger, heavy-hearted, longing for someone you know. May you find a light. May you find a light. May you find a light to guide you home. May you find a light. May you find a light. May you find a light to guide you home.
Most of you in this room know about the refugee crisis that's taking place in our world today, especially in the Middle East around Syria. The magnitude of it, I can't even get my head around. The millions of people who have been displaced, who are missing, who have been killed. I talked this past week with a man who had come from Syria, and just the stories he told me about the atrocities in the Civil War, and since ISIS has come, we can't even talk about how gruesome it is, and we're talking about families and children. And so people are fleeing for their lives, and you've seen on the news families who have tried to get smuggled and go over the sea and to get into some safe place where they can create a new home. Not too long ago, a little 3-year-old boy washed up on a beach, his body, he drowned. And that I think brought humanity for some of us to this whole picture. This is Elan Kurdi right here, 3-year-old right here, who washed up on his beach. He drowned with his 5-year-old brother and his mom in trying to find a new home. And I think for all of us, we realize, man, that's not the world God came to bring. That's not the world as he wants it. And to think, man, as Jesus was a refugee and he identifies with those in the least of these, I think we're called to respond as well. And we have an honor of responding with one of our good partner organizations, World Relief, who's been working with refugees for decades now. And Glenn Peterson, you're part of our church family, but you also work with World Relief. And I'm so grateful that you're here and we get to partner together this Christmas. Glenn, World Relief was really born out of another refugee crisis. Would you share about that with us?
Yeah, thanks, John. And thanks for inviting me to be here. And I'm really excited to be part of this community that is WACC. World Relief started in 1944 in the wake of World War II, when Europe had been torn apart by war. Europe is being torn apart, the Iron Curtain, the Cold War that was to follow. And there was a refugee crisis at that time as people were forced out of their homes. And the United States decided to respond, and a group of people, returning GIs, got together at a church and said, let's collect some money, let's collect some things to send to these people who've been displaced. And it really came out of the church, and that's how it started back then. And then in recent times, the refugee program, starting in the 1980s with the Vietnamese boat people, that refugee crisis. And our office locally here in Southern California has resettled 35,000 refugees in the last 40 years. Wow. And so, we've been involved in this for a long time and always working through the local church.
Yeah, that's one of the things really unique about World Relief is it started in the local church and it's continued to be a movement in the local churches and global church. Share about that.
Yeah, that's one of the values that we have at World Relief. Jesus said that the gates of Hades will not prevail against the church. World Relief and other organizations may come or go, but God has established his church really to be his body and to be the hope of the world at this time. Yeah. And so whether, working with congregations here locally, working with churches in the Middle East and in Europe. I mean, we're working with churches in the Middle East that might be 2 people that gather every week to pray and read the Bible. Here we're working with congregations, and as World Relief states its mission, we're here to empower the local and global church to respond and to stand with the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. And that, that's a biblical 3 things that we always want to stand for. And refugees fit into that group of strangers. And so the local churches are our strategy for assisting.
Yeah, and you were sharing with me about kind of cool things that have happened through some local church recently. Would you share about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, actually starting with this church, there's been some groups that have helped us with putting welcome kits together. So as refugees arrive in the United States, we're able to set up households for them, towels and sheets and toiletries and kitchen supplies, and some of you have responded with that really well. Even some gift cards this past week as the temperature went down. Some kids who are refugees needed coats, and we were able to, on your behalf, provide gift cards to those families so that they could purchase coats. And there's just story after story of churches that have been involved. This past week, we had a family of 7 arrive at Orange County Airport, and a group of 40 people from one of the churches showed up at the airport with a big welcome sign with gifts for the kids, and then they transported them to the apartment that they had helped set up for them. And so just as refugees are coming here and as there's refugees around the world, the church has really stepped up to do that.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Hey, given the climate we're in politically, I know when this term refugee comes up, there's a lot attached to it. And refugee is not like someone looking for a better life. This is someone fleeing to save their lives. But I know World Relief, you probably have gotten questions about, like, what do we do in the climate we're in? Is it safe to help refugees? How do you guys respond to that?
So, yeah, I think firstly, it's really important I think fear is, it's one of those emotions. It's spontaneously generated. Sometimes we need to be fearful when there's danger. We need to respond to that. But I think there's some really important facts that are related to the refugee crisis. And you're right, refugees, that's actually a technical legal term. It's very difficult to become a refugee. It takes a long time. There's a long vetting process. It's multi-layered, it's multifaceted. It's a very robust system. And so it's not really an area where we should have a lot of fear. The people that we meet in our office locally who are refugees are people who have actually fled from. They're actually the victims of this kind of violence. They're not the perpetrators. So the refugee program is very well vetted, and it's safer than some other ways that people could do us harm.
Yeah. Hey, this is not a political issue for our church. This is a global justice issue, responding as Jesus calls us to respond to people who are without a home, like he was. Any last word you give us, or any stories?
Well, like I said, there's just a lot of stories, and they come out of the churches that we work with. One of our volunteers named Jason, he was working with a refugee, and the refugee was actually telling me the story of how Jason had helped him out, and he says to me, I never knew that I would have an American friend, but Jason is like my best friend. In fact, he's like having 100 friends. And this is the transformation happened for both of them. And Jason would say, I never knew that this would be, someone that I invite into my home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and really become part of our lives. And a couple of Easter Sundays ago, I got a text on my phone. I was here at church, and it was a photo from Jason that his friend had been baptized that Sunday and had decided to follow Christ. And Alan is a retired person who's been retired and been volunteering for us. And I met one of his friends from his Bible study, from his small group at a conference that we were both at. And his friend says to me, "Man, Alan has really changed after he started volunteering for you guys. after he retired, he was kind of, didn't know what he was going to do with his life, but because he's involved with refugees now and the things that he's able to do and the things that he's learned from refugees has really transformed his life. And that's exciting. We hear these stories over and over again about people getting involved and the mutual transformation that happens with
Absolutely.
refugees and with volunteers and congregations.
Awesome. Hey, we're so glad you're here. We're so grateful to partner with you. Would you guys thank Glenn for being with us today? Thank you.